Welcome back to our channel. Before we dive into yet another fascinating and mysterious stories, I would like to invite you to watch, to like, and subscribe to the channel. Also, activate the notification sound. Greetings, beloved soul, seeker of origins, listener to the echoes of eternity. Today, we explore about what the Bible hid between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. For centuries, millennia even, the story has been told, etched into the consciousness of billions. Adam was the first manly Pre-Adamiccivilization. Beginning of the human chapter upon planet Earth's story marks the dawn of humanity. The garden, the fall, the commencement of the narrative you inhabit. But what if that beginning wasn't the absolute beginning? What if the stage was already set, the world already ancient, long before Adam drew his first breath? What if, in epochs lost to memory, erased from mainstream chronicles, there were kings, rulers of a primordial earth, not kings of flesh and blood, as you know them, but, perhaps, immortal kings beings of immense power, governing the planet under a divine mandate, in a time before human history coincided the very opening lines of the sacred text, Genesis. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, Genesis 1:1. A statement of perfect, absolute, divine creation, all-powerful, all-wise God bringing forth existence. But the very next verse presents a startling contrast, a jarring shift, and the earth was, or perhaps, became without form, and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Genesis 1:2. Pause and reflect on this profound transition. How could a perfect, omnipotent God, whose very nature is order and light, create something initially characterized as tahu, wabu, formless, empty, chaotic, desolate, and shrouded in darkness? Did God's initial creation fail? Was his first attempt flawed? Or did something catastrophic, something world-altering, happen between verse 1 and verse 2? What transpired in that immense unrecorded gap? What, or who, might have existed, and then been destroyed or judged before the 6 days of restoration and the creation of Adam even began? Ancient texts. Texts often banned, conveniently forgotten, deliberately buried by later authorities of civilizations, of ages that rose and fell long before the recognized dawn of human-kind whispers, of a race of rulers not born of dust, not limited by mortal lifespans, beings who governed a world we were never meant to remember. A world perhaps vastly different from your own, their names, their reigns, their very existence, largely erased from the dominant historical and religious narrative as their legacy, buried beneath layers of sediment, myth, and intentional obfuscation. But heaven, beloved soul, has not forgotten. The memory of the cosmos is longed. The Creator God forgets nothing of this exploration into the deep past, into possibilities beyond the accepted story, stirs something within your spirit, a resonance, a flicker of ancient memory. Then perhaps you are ready to hear more. Consider subscribing to this channel, joining us as we uncover the forgotten pages of divine history, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe it's possible? Could someone, or something, have ruled this earth long before humanity was even conceived? The kings before the flood echoes in ancient records. If there truly existed immortal or extraordinarily long-lived kings who governed the earth before the time of Adam, or even before the great flood of Noah, then surely some trace, some fragmented memory of their reign would have to survive in the oldest records known to humankind, and perhaps they dodi pet within the sun-baked ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. The cradle of civilization, archaeologists unearthed clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform script, preserving voices from millennia past. Among these discoveries was a document unlike any other, a text that continues to baffle and intrigue scholars. The Sumerian King List. This remarkable artifact doesn't just list kings, it documents dynasties, cities, and crucially, reign lengths, stretching back to a time described as before the Great Flood. Inundated the world's entries for these antediluvian pre-flood kings are staggering, defying all human comprehension of time and lifespan. List begins after the kingship descended from heaven. The kingship was in Eridu, the first king named Izalulamhis, reign length 28,800 years, successor, Alauga, ruled for an even longer period, 36,000 years. List continues through various cities, like Bad Tabira, Sippa, and 8 kings in total before the flood. Men Luana reigned for 43,200 years, Men Gala for 28,800 years. Dumused, the shepherd for 36,000 years. Sipads, Zid Ana for 28,800 years. Men, Dur Ana for 21,000 years. Ubara, Tutu for 18,600 years. Total reign of these 8 kings spans an astonishing 241,200 years. Then, the tablet states with stark finality, then the flood swept over. After the flood, the list records kingship descending again, this time in Kish, and the reign lengths become dramatically shorter, eventually falling into historically verifiable human range. What are we to make of these incredible numbers? These impossible durations? What kind of beings could possibly rule cities and kingdoms for tens of thousands of years each? What manner of kings walked the earth in that primordial age? Before the floodwaters cleansed the world, mainstream historical scholarship typically dismisses these pre-flood entries as pure myth, legendary exaggerations, symbolic numbers, perhaps representing eras rather than individual reigns. But a curious fact remains. Many of the post-flood kings and dynasties mentioned later on, the same Sumerian King List, have been corroborated through independent archaeological evidence. The cities have been excavated, their inscriptions found, their approximate timelines aligning with known Mesopotamian history. Why would the Sumerian scribes, meticulous record keepers in many respects, carefully mix verifiable historical fact with what scholars deem outrageous fiction on the same document, unless all of it, including the pre-flood section, was once understood or believed to be true, recording a memory of a vastly different epoch? If these rulers were not human at all, as we understand humanity, what if they belonged to a different order of beings? Divine, angelic, or something else entirely? Beings not bound by the same limitations of time and mortality. The Bible itself offers intriguing, though often cryptic, glimpses into a world populated by more than just humanities. Chapter 6 verse 4. A passage that has puzzled theologians for centuries states, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown who were these sons of God, Bene Elohim. Ancient Jewish tradition, as reflected in texts like the Book of Enoch, widely interpreted them as fallen angels who intermingled with humanitized. Nephilim were their hybrid offspring, often described as giants or powerful, perhaps corrupt. This passage clearly speaks of divine or semi-divine beings interacting with the human world in ancient times, leading to corruption. But what if, before these corrupted unions, before the fall described here, there existed an earlier race, perhaps the original sons of God in their unfallen state, pure divine rulers, appointed by heaven to govern an untouched earth? An age before sin, as humanity knows it, had fully entered the world stage. This idea of a primordial age ruled by non-human or divine beings isn't unique to Sumerian or Hebrew texts. It echoes across cultures. The ancient Egyptians chronicled dynasties of gods like Ra, Osiris, Horus, who ruled Egypt long before the first human pharaoh. Hindu scriptures describe vast cycles of time, with earlier ages like the Satya Yuga, lasting hundreds of thousands or millions of years, often characterized by divine presence and righteousness. Greek mythology speaks of a golden age under the rule of Cronus, a time of peace and abundance, when beings lived like gods. In nearly every major ancient civilization, there exists a cultural memory, a mythic echo of a forgotten time, a primordial epoch ruled not by mortal men, but by gods, immortals, or divine kings. Could these be fragmented recollections of the same lost age? The Bible offers further subtle potential confirmations in the book of Job, chapter 38, verse 7. God challenges Job by recalling the creation of the world. when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. This celestial celebration took place at or before the foundations of the earth. Where laidwoe were these morning stars and sons of God rejoicing at creation? Were they merely distant, passive, celestial onlookers? Or could they have been the very beings appointed by heaven to participate in, or perhaps govern, that newly formed world? Kings ordained before the beginning. Then, something appears to have gone profoundly wrong. A rebellion. A fall. Psalm 82 contains a startling, chilling divine decree. God stands in the divine council and judges among the gods Elohim. He rebukes them for governing unjustly. Then he declares their fate. I said, "You are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall, like any prince." Psalm 82-6-7. This is not metaphor, it is presented as a divine judgment. A sentence passed upon beings called gods and sons of the Most High. Beings who apparently held positions of rulership, judged the poor, maintained the right of the afflicted. They had fallen from their high estate, governed unjustly, and were now condemned to experience mortality, to die like men, to fall like any prince. Could this psalm be a divine record of the judgment upon those very pre-Adamic, immortal rulers, whose reigns were perhaps cut short by rebellion and divine sentence? It seems their names, their specific histories, were largely erased from the mainstream religious narrative that focuses on the Adamic line, but perhaps, as your text suggests, they were not erased entirely from memory or from existence. Remain, etched into Sumerian clay, echoed in global myths, hinted at in cryptic biblical verses, perhaps buried deep within the earth itself, are remnants of their forgotten agethes, were potentially the kings before Adam, and when the judgment came, perhaps the catastrophe hinted at between Genesis 1-1 and 1-2, or the later flood of Noheven closed that chapter, but maybe not the entire bookwit. If one of these primordial figures, one of these divine rulers, never fell, or was restored, or operated under a different mandate? What if one remained hidden in plain sight throughout subsequent human history, unexpectedly, bearing an ancient authority, under a different name? A king with no beginning and no end. Melchizedek, the king without beginning or end. After the great flood, seemingly silenced the voices of those ancient, long-reigning kings. The sacred scriptures shift focus, the narrative centers on Noah's descendants. The repopulation of the earth, the rise of human patriarchs and nations. There are no more records of rulers reigning for Leonono. Explicit mention of immortal beings walking the earth, interacting directly with humanity as kings. It appears that the age of the immortals, whatever its true nature, had definitively ended until, suddenly, unexpectedly, a profoundly mysterious figure steps onto the stage of history in Genesis chapter 14. His appearance is brief, enigmatic, yet carries immense theological weight. His name is Melchizedek. Emerges seemingly out of nowhere. Text provides no lineage, no backstory, no introduction. He simply appears after the patriarch Abram, later Abraham, returns victorious from rescuing his nephew Lot. Melchizedek, identified as the king of Salem, likely the ancient name for Jerusalem, meaning peace, and, crucially, as priest of God Most High, El Elyon, comes out to meet Abram. He brings bread and wine, a foreshadowing, perhaps, of a later sacrament. He blesses Abram in the name of God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and Abram, the chosen patriarch, recognizes Melchizedek's superior spiritual authority by giving him a tithe, a tenth of all the spoils of war. Genesis 14:18-20. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, Melchizedek disappears from the Genesis narrative. Was this mysterious king-priest? He holds two significant titles: King of Righteousness, the meaning of Melchizedek, and King of Peace, King of Salem. He serves El Elyon, God Most High, a title emphasizing God's supreme sovereignty, used even before the covenant, Nemoe, was fully revealed to Israel. This alone would make him a significant figure. A righteous Gentile king, acknowledging the true God in a largely pagan world, but the true, staggering mystery surrounding Melchizedek is unveiled centuries later. In the New Testament's epistle to the Hebrews, author of Hebrews, arguing for the superiority of Christ's priesthood over the Levitical priesthood, devotes an entire chapter. Hebrews 7:2, analyzing the significance of Melchizedek, makes this astonishing statement about him. In Hebrews 7 verse 3, he is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. Let the weight of those words sink in. Without father, without mother, without genealogical recorded ancestry. No earthly origin, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, implying it, immortal, resembling or made like unto the Son of God. He remains present tense in the Greek. A priest forever, not was but remains woe, or what could possibly fit this description. Some theologians, uncomfortable with the implications, attempt to soften the mystery, suggest Melchizedek is merely a type of Christ, a symbolic figure foreshadowing Jesus' eternal priesthood. They argue that without genealogy simply means his ancestry wasn't recorded in the Levitical lists, emphasizing his non-Levitical priesthood, but the language used in Hebrews seems far more absolute, more literal than mere symbolism. It doesn't just say his genealogy isn't recorded. It says he is without genealogy. It doesn't just say he foreshadows eternity. It says he has neither beginning of days nor end of life. It doesn't say he was a priest. It says he remains a priest forever. These are not typical descriptions for a mere human type or symbol. They point towards something or someone fundamentally different. If Melchizedek truly has no beginning and no end, then he cannot be an ordinary human being. However, righteous cannot be simply a Canaanite king who happened to worship the true God, cannot be just another prophet or priest. Within the normal stream of human history stands apart, unique among all the figures encountered in the Old Testament narrative, except perhaps for the divine appearances themselves. Theophanies, only God, the divine Son, is described in truly comparable terms: Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, eternal, high priest forever. Hebrews chapter 7 makes the connection even more profound, and perhaps more perplexing. It argues that Jesus Christ was made a high priest forever, not according to the temporary Levitical order, but after the order of Melchizedek. Hebrews 7:11-17, the pattern, the order, the kind of eternal priesthood held by Melchizedek came first. Jesus fulfills and embodies that eternal order. This doesn't diminish Christ. It elevates the significance of Melchizedek's mysterious priesthood. It implies Melchizedek represented an ancient, eternal order of priesthood, existing outside the later Levitical system, an order to which even Christ's eternal priesthood is compared. Opens the door to a possibility that challenges conventional timelines, a possibility hinted at in your text. What if Melchizedek is not merely a symbol pointing forward to Christ? What if he is also a remnant pointing backward? Backward to that forgotten age before Adam, before the flood? Could he be a surviving member, perhaps the only righteous one remaining, of those ancient, immortal, or divine rulers who governed the primordial earth? A being now hidden in plain sight, operating under a priestly title, still carrying an echo of that original divine authority. The last witness of a lost epoch, interacting briefly with Abraham, blessing the father of the faithful. Consider Psalm 110 verse 4, a messianic psalm quoted in Hebrews. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You, the Messiah, are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. This oath was declared by David centuries before Christ's birth, yet centuries after Melchizedek's brief appearance to Abraham. It speaks of an eternal priesthood, linked specifically to this enigmatic figure. Would God himself swear an oath invoking a character mentioned only fleetingly in Genesis, unless Melchizedek represented something far more significant, far more ancient, far more foundational? Thor, a simple Canaanite king-priest. Early Jewish and Christian traditions wrestled with Melchizedek's identicism, speculated he was Shem, the righteous son of Noah, miraculously living on, but Shem had a genealogy, a beginning, and an end. Some suggested he was an angel, perhaps Michael, or another high-ranking celestial being. Appearing in human form book, angels are typically messengers or warriors, not described as kings of cities holding an eternal priesthood in this manner. The description in Hebrews seems to defy these explanations, pushing towards something more profound called Melchizedek, be a divine being, perhaps even a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ himself, a Christophany. This is a common theological view. Could he be exactly what the text seems to imply? An uncreated, eternal being, resembling the Son of God. A king, priest from an order that predates the Adamic world. A remnant of the age before the gap. If Melchizedek, this immortal king-priest, survived from a previous age, could there be others? If one witness remained hidden through the ages, interacting subtly with key figures like Abraham, guiding, blessing, perhaps preparing the way, then does this hint at other unseen realities, other ancient beings or powers still operating behind the scenes of human history? In Melchizedek, we don't just encounter a biblical curiosity or a theological puzzle, potentially glimpse a crack in the veil of recorded historia. Sliver of light from a forgotten dawn, piercing through the curtain that was perhaps intentionally drawn to keep the age of the immortals hidden from Adamic humanity, but veils can forgotten. Things can stir and perhaps the memory. The influence of these ancient kings is not entirely Genetha gap in Genesis. A world lost between two verses. Let us return to the very beginning, to the foundational verses of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, a statement of perfection, completeness, divine power, and original goodness. God's initial creative act. Verse 2. And the earth was or became without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. A description of chaos, emptiness, darkness, watery desolation. How do we reconcile these two verses? How does a perfect creation, initiated by a perfect God, immediately become formless, void, and dark? Did God create chaos? That seems contrary to his nature. For God is a God of order, not confusion. 1 Corinthians 14:33. This apparent contradiction has led to a long-standing, though often marginalized, theological interpretation, known as the gap theory, or sometimes the ruin reconstruction theory. This theory proposes that there exists a vast, unrecorded gap in time, potentially spanning millions or billions of years, and encompassing significant events between Genesis 1-1 and Genesis 1-2. According to this view, Genesis 1-1 describes God's original perfect creation of the heavens and the earth, possibly including life forms. Perhaps even the pre-Adamic civilization, ruled by the immortal kings we've discussed, was a world of beauty, order, and light. Something catastrophic occurred within that gap, a cosmic rebellion. A devastating judgment. This event resulted in the destruction or ruin of that original creation, leaving the earth in the state described in Genesis 1-2. Without form and void. Hebrew tohu, wabu, submerged in water and darkness. Genesis 1-3 onwards then describes not the original creation, ex nihilo, out of nothing, but rather a recreation, a restoration, a reformation of the ruined earth over 6 literal days, preparing it for the introduction of Adamic man. The Spirit of God hovering over the waters signifies the beginning of this restorative work. Weight could have caused such a primordial catastrophe. Proponents of the gap theory often link this ruin to the fall of Lucifer. Satan passages like Isaiah 14:12. 15. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, Lucifer, son of dawn. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. And Ezekiel 28:12, 19. Describing the king of Tyre, but widely interpreted as symbolically depicting Lucifer's original perfection, placement in Eden, the mountain of God, and subsequent fall, due to pride and violence, are seen as describing a pre-Adamic rebellion in heaven that had devastating consequences for the earth, which was perhaps Lucifer's original domain or kingdom before his false rebellion, led by Lucifer, possibly involving other angelic beings, the sons of God, who later fell, led to a divine judgment, perhaps a universal flood different from Noah's flood, cosmic warfare, or other cataclysm. that destroyed that original world order and plunged the earth into the chaotic state of Genesis 1-2. The darkness upon the face of the deep wasn't original. It was the result of judgment upon rebellion. In this interpretation potentially provides a framework for understanding the existence of angels and spiritual hierarchies before the creation of Adam. Origin of Satan and demonic forces as fallen angelic beings from that pre-Adamic era. Presence of fossils, geological ages, and evidence of ancient lifelike dinosaurs that seem difficult to fit into a young Earth interpretation of the six-day creation of Adam's world. These could belong to the original creation of Genesis 1-1, destroyed in the gap. Existence of pre-Adamic rulers or civilizations, like those hinted at in the Sumerian King List or global myths, who might have participated in or been judged during Lucifer's rebellion. Reason for the earth being formless and void. Before God began the 6 days of restoration, it was a state resulting from divine judgment on a previous world order. Hebrew words, tahu wa bo, themselves, are significant. While often translated formless and void, they carry connotations of chaos, desolation, ruin, emptiness resulting from judgment. These same words are used elsewhere in Scripture to describe lands devastated by God's judgment, e.g. Isaiah 34, banding 11, Jeremiah 4:23. Jeremiah 4:23-26 offers a particularly striking parallel, describing a vision of the earth returned to a state of tahu wa bao, with no light, no inhabitants, no birds, cities broken down. A vision explicitly linked to God's fierce anger and judgment. Could Jeremiah be seeing a vision looking back to the pre-Adamic ruin? If the gap theory holds truth, it dramatically reframes the Genesis narrative. The 6 days are not the absolute beginning of everything, but the restoration of a planet judged and ruined due to angelic rebellion. Adam is not the first sentient being created on earth, but the first of the current human race, placed on a restored planet, tasked with replenishing it, given dominion, and facing a test of obedience in the shadow of a previous rebellion, led by the now fallen adversary, Satan, who tempts Adam and Eve in the Garden. This adds layers of cosmic significance to the human story. Living out our history on a stage where a great spiritual battle has already been fought, and continues to be fought, a battle that began long before Adam. What if everything we've known is only a fraction of the truth? What if Adam was not the first chapter, but the second? Before him were kings immortal, soared by heaven, fallen by judgment, buried by time, but not erased. Sumerian tablets whisper their Regan. Scripture echoes their names. And Melchizedek stands as a silent witness, not of what is to come, but what waits. Bible begins with darkness, bet perhaps that darkness wasn't absent sight, was aftermath. Seeming was lost a world, a king, divine order, and yet an priest still walks in the order of Eternet young Kriya Twenden. He's not Alaneath veil, is thinning. Cracks in history are widening, and the kings may rise again. You are not just watching Historio, are standing at the edge of it, because the story of Mandadant began with light, and it will end with revelation. If this truth calls to your soul, you're not subscribed, let the journey continue. Comment below. Who do you believe ruled before Adam, and more importantly, who still does?